So let's talk about hiring and keeping the right team in a growing startup or a company. So, in our discussion today, Rachel, I think this is a topic that we've all discussed and we all have to go through is how do we recruit the best people and the best team players who can actually support the growth journeys which most of the startups or innovative companies are on today. So what's your experience been so far?
Oh, it's a great question, and it's a really hot topic I find really exciting because it changes at every stage in the company. So when you're going, your first few employees up to maybe your 10 employees, the fit and the ability to kind of just merge in very seamlessly very quickly is really important so that people hit the ground running, and that's one change. But then when you kind of do the next wave, the 10 to 20, you're really thinking about the people that are beginning to be stretching you forwards. And so suddenly that, how you recruit and how you then retain those people has to change quite dramatically. And likewise, as you step up and up and up, those approaches changes. And actually that the hard bit in a company is recognizing where you're at and what you might need to recruit in, so that you don't just recruit in for people that I get on with today,
Yeah,
and actually think about, well, people that may challenge me in a way that I'm comfortable about and that actually takes me on to the next step.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, do you have a playbook that you follow today?
A little bit, actually. So I think one of the things I find at the moment is, particularly in smaller companies, what you don't have is the bandwidth in the company to do all that recruitment activity yourself.
Yeah,
And so the playbook very much for me has to be finding trusted partners outside the company, sort of in the recruitment space, who completely get what it is you're doing and are willing to be an extension of your company and go out and shout from the rooftops about how amazing it's going to be about working with this exciting, innovative company who's growing fast and has all these challenges, but also these opportunities as well. So I think that's like step one in the playbook on it. And then step two for me has been getting the team we have today to be really articulate about where our gaps are. What is it that they're really struggling with?
yeah,
And also understanding that they have career progression as well. So, giving them the opportunity to say, in the company, we really need this. And I want to fill that role, which means my role is going to become free. And so, actually, making the time, that's where really, I think it's important to make the time in the team, talk about, well, what is it that we're missing? Where do people want to end up when they're looking 5, 10 years down the line, so they don't
yeah,
suddenly feel left out? And then I think that the final bit really around the playbook is making sure that we have a really well thought out onboarding program, because that's where it can fall apart really quick. You've found these great people, but if you actually haven't thought about how do you look after them in that sort of first 3 month window, they don't get the best opportunity and the company doesn't get the best opportunity, and sometimes you've just lost before you've even got any further. So those kind of steps really are that foundation that I've found worked quite well. Have you had sort of similar experience yourself in terms of the going out and getting the team and how you to get them?
yeah. I think it's an interesting exercise, right? Starting out, when you have a small team where you are recruiting one to one of people who will be doing the role. But then getting to also a point where it's not you who's recruiting, but the team members that you've recruited, they are going ahead and recruiting people that are going to work. And how do you then set up the culture and the empowerment towards that the people that are coming in fit into that value stream. And I think that's been an interesting exercise for us, but as you said, it's the key thing is you're not trying to do everything on your own. You find the right partners, both internal and external. I've had recommendations from friends, who've worked with people and spoken to them and see if anybody, they're fit. But one key thing that I always put out there is, especially when you are working for a startup or innovative company, one of my key questions to go to ask anybody is, why would you want to join us, right? It's not an easygoing task working in a startup. Things change on a daily basis. The momentum is quite fast versus is in a big company, and there's all the pros that you have, but people need to understand from day one. It's not going to be easy sailing if you join a startup or a company that's growing very rapidly. And by stating that, you can, you know, start to see if it's a right fit, not just for you but for them also. And I think we're still in the phase where we're trying to understand and optimize that process, which you said, the onboarding pathway for people, because that is so critical in terms of not just hiring people on based on what they can do today, but what you want them to do for the business, and can they grow into those roles so that they can free us up from doing some of the things that we are having to do most times. And to do that, how do you go about training them? Because just expecting to think that, oh, we'll tell them go and do this task and they will figure it out on their own without any training and any support, and then not be realistic in expectations on the outcome of the task. I think that's a expectation balancing act that's quite critical, especially for early stage businesses who are growing really fast.
Correct. And you have to build that actually into a structure, don't you? Because you kind of you might hope that it would just happen naturally, that they would talk to their line manager and everything would be all right. But actually, if you don't schedule in one-to-ones and have and an agenda that says it's okay to talk about training, I'm going to ask you about what your training needs are. I need you to be raising things up. People tend to almost feel a little bit awkward in both directions, both line managers and their reports, raising things in an informal way. So unless you
Yeah.
give them that little bit of structure to say, do you know what, it'd be really helpful if once a month, once every 2 months, you just talked about these topics, and then actually feed that up into the senior management team to make decisions about, where we might put money, whether people need to migrate roles slightly. And even then, even within that, in a small company or bigger ones, you get a real different response. Some people don't want to talk about it at all. You might ask the question, they're like, no, I'm all fine. And you really have to tease out, come on, no, you're not. What can we do? How about this? How about that? And then other people, they'll come with a list 20 pages long of all the things they want to do and how they want to do it. So,
Yeah.
isn't a one size fits all, is it, within terms of that kind of career progression and the technology development, the path that they're going to go on?
Yeah, I think it's something that I've looked at more, even from a tech perspective. Is your skills are, especially when you look at skill matrices that exist in most organization, they act as a passive document. Not a lot of people, even if they've been in the business for 10 years, actually go and look at what that document says about the skills, which may have not been any relevance now. And I think that's a critical aspect, because skills, uh, for me, are things which are effectively dynamic. If you're not doing something today, even though you learned it, you've had training on it, but you don't do that for next 2 years, you cannot be expected to know that and do that to the same level and quality. And that's, again, when people's roles change as well. There are skills that they need to let go of, and there's new skills that they need to adopt. And those are some of the discussions that needs to be happening as a part of that, quarterly objectives and one-to-ones, to understand what are things that actually I don't think you will need to do anymore, and what are things we think you would need to do, or the area you need to should be working on. And I think that's definitely that gives them the employees a pathway, but also for the businesses to understand at any given point in time, who are the people who could actually do the job that we want, right? And where are the actual gaps that we have in the business that we need to recruit or further train for. Uh, but it goes to a very different point, which I'm sure that we'll have a different episode talking more in detail about, is small, startups, small innovative businesses. The one thing that they do lack is processes, and the time to put processes and apply processes. And again, I think, as you said, it's not just a matter of recruiting people, it's actually giving them the best shot, putting that plan in place, putting that one-to-ones in place. And I think, it'll be quite interesting to understand if when you work with any of the external partners, right, is there a framework that they can support provide and say that, guys, this is what you need to follow? Because a lot of small companies outsource their HR, and if it's not just a tick box exercise but something which is a little bit more involved, and I read it somewhere and I've seen some videos about this, is a lot of companies have exit interviews. Nobody has a interview which is a stay interview
Yeah,
today.
keep going. Yes.
uh, so yeah, so have you had any experiences with any of your partners being able to support you with not just a recruitment but the entire onboarding cycle and their progression?
Yes, and I think the best HR support companies can offer that personal touch often, where they're almost an extension of your team rather than somebody you just call up when there's a problem.
Yeah,
And the difficulty is that costs money, but it's probably a lot less money than having an HR person on your team full time.
yeah,
And you've got to spend the time making sure that they fully understand your company as well, because what you don't want them to be is an extension of your company but not reflecting the way that you work.
yeah,
We had a really interesting conversation recently within the Q5D about progression to senior roles. So as you go from a smaller company to a bigger company, a lot of people want to become more senior as they go along.
yeah,
And skills, um, technical skills was a fairly easy conversation to have. But then what about what we're expecting people to develop in terms of their behaviours or their how they actually portray the company values and the culture? And actually, what we found, you've got to articulate that yourself first. You can't expect people to just guess it based on how people in the company behave today. You do have to spend some time and write those things down and say, well, actually, we think this is a really important behavioural trait for a senior person within the company. And some of that then allowed for roles that could both be called the same thing, but you could have different, if you think about maybe in engineering, you can end up with a senior engineer, one of whom is maybe more mentoring and leadership
yeah,
type activity, and one who is perhaps more technical seniority. And so,
yeah,
already you've kind of got things think. And so actually then making sure that we're sharing that out to our external HR companies to say, look,
yeah,
when we're developing ways of assessing people, it's not just on a skills matrix, there's also going to be some other things too. And sometimes you have to draw those things out in a conversation rather than actually, can you demonstrate that you've built this or made that?
yeah.
It's a different assessment capability, isn't it?
It is absolutely. I think, and having that what to call as effectively a pathway, right? That teams and employees and businesses can understand that actually, to be a team leader, you might not need to be an expert across all the different skill sets, but there's a collection of different skills that you do need, which includes not just a technical skill but also the soft skill to go around with that, including communications and stuff. Which again create that entire persona of what a good leader in the company needs to be, and for people to be able to work, see that tangibly in terms of what that is. I think the aspect of demonstration is still always there, but how you demonstrate and how you perceive that is very relative in terms of because it could be a 360-degree feedback approach, right? To utilize to say, actually, you might say that, okay, you are very approachable, and as a leader, that is important to have, and you are very, you are able to communicate clearly, but what do the people around you say on that? And that's more weightage, because you might think it is, but actually they might think something different, or it might be vice versa as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
So I think that's absolutely a key aspect as we see this for businesses to improve. Uh, have you seen or have you had any experiences in terms of when you recruit people? You know, are you recruiting in for the role that you have now, or the role you perceive they could fill in potentially in the future?
It's always easier to recruit for the one you have now because you've probably got a job description or you could write
Yeah,
it really easily. The other ones are actually the way you make some dramatic changes in your company. And those are the ones that are really critical. It One of the bits I've struggled, found difficult, and it's been interesting. I've had different people recommend different ways of doing things. Is particularly when you don't have a skill set at all in the company, trying to articulate what it is you're missing is really tricky. So, for example, if software isn't your prime piece in the company, but you realize that software is going to be important for you don't even know where to start crafting a job title or a job description, because software engineer can probably cover anything from all
Yeah.
sorts of extreme. How do I specify what language they need, all of those bits. And I think the best advice I'd got really is, again, yes, reach out to your network, people who work in that space,
Yeah.
and get them to give you a bit of guidance about how you might craft that in the first place. But equally, if you've got a good recruitment company, they should be able to kind of say, look, here's some example CVs or some job. Do you think these are the kind of people that you're looking for? And actually, for those sorts of roles, probably what I've articulated first is not where we end up.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a journey through it. I think I need this, and then people come back and go, well, actually, you probably need this. So, being open to actually being guided by people outside your company
Yeah.
is really important, but it's still a leap of faith. The moment those people come in,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of managers, when they're recruiting for their team, they kind of know that those roles well enough that they can judge whether they're doing it well or not.
Yeah.
There's always that scary thing when you're recruiting into your company for roles that actually nobody really kind of gets other than that person coming in. It's like, how will I know if they're doing it right? And you
Yeah.
do, because actually it's either a success or it isn't.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a situation that can make founders or senior leadership much more uncomfortable. And sometimes the tendency is, well, let's not recruit it at all. Let's just subcontract that piece, which can be still really valuable and a really great way of doing it. But only if that's not going to be one of your core competencies in the long
Yes.
run. The longer you keep it outside your business, the harder it is to bring it in as one of your kind of like capabilities later, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, and that's, definitely very relevant, because when I look at it, I've both, if it's a role that you haven't done, or it's an area of the business, but it's not something that you've gone hands on in, uh, and you rely on, okay, it's a known role in industry, you should just be able to recruit for that. What you also miss out on by just going by that norm is going with a lot of noise. And and an example is when we look at sales roles, for example. Sales, is not a new thing in any industry, and none of the software or hardware sales. uh, but one thing that we had to look at ourselves was, people can talk a very good game, but when it comes to delivery and commitments, we've had more success with leadership led sales than actually salespeople led sales. um, and that's sometimes difficult to judge, because you're expecting that, or you're hiring somebody, they have an area of expertise, and they can come and deliver. But how do you test out for that, right? So I think it's okay for companies to actually come out with a recruitment strategy and stages which works for them and not is necessarily an industry norm or standard. Even when working with external partners, and when we work with external recruitment partners, we tell them this is the process we would like to follow, and they might say that actually no, this is not the chance. Like, but if we don't do that, we'll be back with you 3 months in time, with a candidate who didn't actually deliver what we thought they would deliver. And it will be a time and expensive exercise for everybody concerned. And I think so that's quite important, that at the end of the day, people take feel what will give them the confidence. And it could basically also include things like, if it's something like there's something that they're subcontracting out today, can they have some of those people actually sit on the interview to judge, to be able to validate this. The other thing that's very interesting, especially in our domain of manufacturing, is there's skill sets which are coming up, which 10 years ago you would never imagine. So gaming engineers would never be something you would consider hiring into a manufacturing company. Yet, a lot more companies are hiring gaming engineers into non-gaming roles now to build digital twins, to build simulations, to be able to do a different aspect of the business. And that again becomes another tricky thing, because the normal partners that you would go to for recruitment specialize in manufacturing or specialize in the area that you work in. They do not specialize in hiring game engineers, and the people who do specialize in, they don't specialize in manufacturing. So how do you actually go on to recruit these skill sets which probably are not even standard to your industry anymore? And I think that's again a learning exercise. But as you said, speaking to your peers, speaking to your network, and hopefully, in our case, if anybody wants to speak to the community, that's something that it's quite useful, because it gives you at least a perspective of what's the best approach to go about this.
Absolutely.
So I think I'm sure we can talk a lot about more about recruitment, the processes, what businesses should do. Is there a final word of advice, Rachel, that you would have for businesses, who are growing, who are trying to recruit the best talent? You know, what should their approach be when they define a job role, or when they assess a candidate, or when they even start to think about, do I need somebody?
I think my one bit of time is just make sure you carve out enough time to really think about it properly,
Yeah,
because the more time you can spend at the beginning, really trying to understand how you want to do this, the smoother the whole process goes after that. I've seen it being too awkward sometimes, where all of a sudden you need somebody in, you just get somebody in, and then you're unpicking a bad decision later. So put the time in up at the front, it always pays dividends. And as you said, talk to people around you. It's not a one person job. Reach out to your network, reach out to the contacts you have in the relevant places, because there's the ones that are going to really either find you the perfect candidate or just help you refine your ideas.
absolutely. I think on the final note as well, that there are partners and experts who do support this, and this is their domain, including your community. So don't look at short-term cost and make decisions. Look at the long-term benefits, because uh, the impact of not recruiting correctly is much larger than how much time or short-term money you think you would save.
Correct.
Great, thanks guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll keep you updated on more such topics within our community.